Hello my friends, HM here. In this video we are going to discuss kill ratios and daily losses for tanks, armored vehicles and artillery. A kill ratio of 3 for Ukrainian tanks would mean that Ukraine are destroying 3 times more tanks than Russia is destroying from Ukraine. So that's how that's defined. Why would you study kill ratios? Well, you'll study it because they show who's winning the war. The higher the kill ratio is, the more of the enemy equipment you destroy compared to what they destroy of your equipment, well, the higher the likelihood that you will win the war. And therefore, everybody who has an interest in war will study kill ratios. In this video, we'll see how these kill ratios are when calculated for the entire war, but also for the last 10 months of the war. And then we'll see whether there's any development in these kill ratios and why these changes are happening. We'll also end the video by discussing what Ukraine can do to get their kill ratios up. So if you think this sounds interesting, then keep watching. Let's start by first briefly defining what kind of weapons we are talking about. The first weapon are tanks, and I have 2 pictures up here of 2 typical tanks. This one is an American Abrams, and I'm not sure about this one, but I think it's a German Leopard 2 tank. Anyway, what makes tanks unique as a weapon? Well, they have the biggest gun on the battlefield for close combat. Specifically, modern NATO tanks have a 120mm gun that they can use to fire 2 to 4 kilometers away with high precision and destroy bunkers or other tanks and armored vehicles or anything on the battlefield that are visible. They cannot be used to hit trenches because they are dug down and nothing sticks up. For that you'll use a mortar, but that's another discussion. So how many people does it take to man a tank? It typically have a crew of 3 people. There'll be a driver, and then there'll be a gun controller who takes aim at stuff on the battlefield, and then there'll be a gun feeder who makes sure that the tank can fire as quickly as possible. And that's pretty much all there is to say about a tank. Maybe I should also say it normally also has a light machine gun on top. You can see here on the Abrams, and also here you have a very light machine gun on the top of this tank here. Okay, the next type of weapon is armored vehicles. I have 3 examples of armored vehicles here. We have a Bradley up here, that's an armored fighting vehicle. Then we have a German armored fighting vehicle here. I don't know exactly what the name of that is. And then we have an armored personnel carrier. It's not a fighting vehicle. And you can see that because it doesn't have any substantial weapons. It only have a super lightweight machine gun here, and then it has an anti-tank rocket launcher here that has to be operated by a man that pops up and start operating them. Whereas these fighting vehicles, they have dedicated heavy machine guns and other weapons like rockets that can be operated from within the vehicle. Armored personnel carriers are just hauling around infantry on the battlefield. In fact, this specific one, it's called an M113. I've been driving around myself when I was in the military. That was what we had. And this Bradley up here is something that Ukraine got, and they have been very happy about them because the weapons it has are really good. But that's another discussion. I'd say that an armored fighting vehicles like this Bradley here is typically operated by 3 people. That would be a driver, and then a machine gunner, and also a rocket shooter. And then it'll have typically the ability to haul around 8 infantry soldiers in its body. But that's all I want to say about armored vehicles. There are all kind of armored vehicles, and I haven't discussed all of them by far. Next up is artillery. I have 3 pictures of artillery. Down here we have the most common kind of artillery. That's a 155mm howitzer, or howitzer, I'm not sure how it's pronounced. It's a German Panzerhaubitze, I think, 2000. It can fire heavy shells, 155mm shells, about 30 kilometers with standard munition. So they are sitting behind front lines, and people who are at the front line can call in artillery fire on positions of the enemy that they have located. So that's how they're used. Then we have also mortars. This is you could call that an armored vehicle with a mortar system. So it is an artillery system. They don't have as long range, typically 8-15 kilometers, but they are shooting up and then the grenade falls down. So they're good for targeting trenches where the grenade has to explode inside the trench falling down. That's unlike tanks that can only shoot in a straight line, so you can't really attack a trench system that way. You'd use mortars to do that. And then there's a third kind of artillery here, that's rocket propelled artillery. This picture here we have a HIMARS system that has rockets that are high precision and that can shoot up to 80 kilometers. You can also fit bigger rockets in this system that can shoot up to 300 kilometers, but normally the range would not be that large for rocket propelled artillery. And also not all rocket propelled artillery are like this HIMARS where they have a GPS navigation. Some are just dumb rockets that are shot out and then you shoot a lot of them and hope something hit. They're not very precise. That's another kind of rocket artillery, and also the range of that kind of rocket artillery is not as high, but it's longer than those 30 kilometers that are typical for heavy artillery artillery. Okay, but that's the weapons. Now I have gathered all my data for kill ratios in this table that you can see right here. And let's start by discussing my kill ratio for tanks. It's here in the last column, it's 3.7. And how do I get that? Well, I take the Russian losses confirmed of 2,920 and divide it by Ukraine losses confirmed of 794. That will give you 3.7, meaning that Ukraine are killing 3.7 times more Russian tanks than the other way around. So of course that's a pretty good kill ratio for Ukraine, but it's not enough, unfortunately. Russia is a much larger country than Ukraine, and in order for Ukraine to win the war, they have to destroy, I'd say they have to destroy at least the population ratio between Ukraine and Russia, which is 4.1. Russia has 4.1 times more people than Ukraine has. So whatever the kill ratio Ukraine has, it needs to grow above 4.1 for Ukraine to win the war. And also Russia's economy is much larger than Ukraine's. Measured in US dollars, it's like 14 times larger than Ukraine's economy. But if you are adjusting that for purchasing power, then it's probably 7 times larger than Ukraine's economy. So Ukraine needs to have really good kill ratios in order to win this war, unfortunately, because it's a much smaller country. And that's why they need aid from outside in order to win the war. Otherwise, they can't win. But let's take a look at what else we have of data here. I can tell you that these confirmed data I have are coming from an organization of volunteers that are combing the internet for video and pictures of killed Russian and Ukrainian tanks. Every single kill they document, and that's where I have my data from for confirmed kills. Then there's Russian losses unconfirmed. It's a much higher number. Here we have 7,137 tanks that are unconfirmed killed. Those data I have from the Ukraine army that are reporting them and that are updating them every day. They might be a bit inflated because the Ukraine army perhaps have an incentive to report that they are doing more destruction on the Russians than they really are. That should be considered when we look at the Russian losses unconfirmed, that they are from the Ukraine army. But what is obvious is that unconfirmed losses have to be much higher than the confirmed losses, because not every kill on the battlefield is documented by video or pictures and therefore cannot be confirmed. And it doesn't seem unlikely that Ukraine has managed to destroy twice as many tanks here than are actually being able to be confirmed. Then what do I do with this number here of unconfirmed tank kills? Well, I divide it by the days that this war has lasted. That's 777 here. It's from February 24th of 2022 to April 11th of 2024. That's when I ended this data collection. And that will give you 9.2 tanks kill every day. Later on in my presentation, we are going to compare how these numbers, both the kill ratios and also the daily kills, are changing over time. But what we can then also do is that in this table, I have the Romanian, Russian active and passive stocks on 11th of April 2024. I've calculated that to almost 7,000 tanks left either in long-term storage or active on the battlefield in Ukraine. I have gotten these data from other sources, and if you're interested in knowing about all the sources I have for this table, then you should go to, there's a link below this video where you can go to my vlog, where there is an Excel spreadsheet that you can download, and I can show you that Excel spreadsheet. Let me bring it in. It looks like this. It has all my data in it, and then if you scroll down here you have links that you can open to all my sources. But I'll get rid of this. If you want to have more details about these sources, then you should watch my other video where I talk generally about kill ratios for total equipment losses and also for personal killed. That was the first video I made on these kill ratios. But here we just want to focus on specific kill ratios for tanks and artillery and armored vehicles. So what else can we see here for tanks? Well, we can see that we have this remaining stock of Russian tanks, and then we can divide this number here of average daily kills into this number of the stocks. And then you can calculate the number of months that Russia has left. Then we can see that Russia will run out of their stocks of tanks in 25 months. I think that's also an important measure here. And then I have one more thing. I have the likely Russian new production of tanks in this column. We can see it's 0.68 tanks every day that they can produce. So obviously, when they are losing 9 tanks per day but cannot even make one new tank, then of course when they finally run out of stocks in 25 months from here, well, then they have a problem because they can only produce less than 1 tank per day. And then the intensity of the war will likely drop off quite a lot. Of course, Russia can also buy tanks from other countries, but they don't have that many countries they can buy from. They have Iran and North Korea, but their production capacity is likely far less than Russia's production capacity for making tanks. So it's not that they can get a whole lot of tanks from those sources either. So for Ukraine, it's really about holding together the next 2 years of this war. Then it will be hopefully easier for Ukraine if they're not defeated by that time, because then Russia will have run out of tanks. And also, what else can we see? Well, there's discuss these total armored vehicles. Here we have a kill ratio of 2.6, so it's lower than for tanks. And we can see Russia has bigger stocks of that left. They have almost 16,000 left of these armored vehicles, and that will last them 30 months if we assume that the daily kills is staying the same at 17.6. That's not a good assumption to make. As we'll see later in my presentation, the intensity of the war is increasing and these daily kills are going up. So in reality, they have less than 30 months left of stocks for armored vehicles. And what about artillery? It's down here. Here we can see the kill ratio is 2.6, and they have about 22 months left of stocks of artillery if the war continue with the intensity it was on average for the past 26 months that the war has lasted. But let's move on. So the next table here I want to show you, this one is comparing data for the entire time of the war. That's 26 months it has been going on, and then with the last 10 months of the war. And right here in these three columns we have the entire war. That was the same data as we had in the previous table we just discussed. And now here in the last three columns we have the same data calculated just for June 15, 23 to April 11th of 24. So what does this show us with regard to kill ratios? Well, for tanks it shows that the kill ratio has unfortunately dropped from 3.7 and now for the last 10 months to 3.4. And for armored vehicles it has dropped from 2.6 to 2.5. Now, why has these kill ratios dropped for Ukraine? Well, the main explanation is that Ukraine has not gotten enough ammunition delivered and also weapons from United States and Europe. We have simply starved them, especially the United States, that has not given Ukraine any significant weapon supplies the past 8 months because the MAGA movement controlled by Trump has prevented it from happening. But finally some aid has come through, but it's not enough. We have to put more aid for Ukraine. We have to do it fast because Russia is currently in an offensive that are threatening to break through Ukrainian front lines. It's very, very serious. And another thing that happened was that Ukraine had a summer offensive last summer that they should never have engaged in. It was crazy. That summer offensive failed because Ukraine had no air force. Basically, Ukraine's air force is less than 1/10 of the Russian air force, and it's also a very old plane, so they couldn't support their ground troops with air force. And of course, they should have had an air force before they even think about making a big offensive against the Russians. And also, Russia had time to build strong trenches and minefields to defend their lines, so it was not really possible for Ukraine just to storm through without an air force in highly fortified positions. And then also another point is that Ukraine had nearly none long-range anti-aircraft missiles to keep Russian aircraft away from front line, because these Russian aircraft are used to drop glider bombs in safe distance from the front lines. They cannot be shot down by Ukrainian anti-aircraft systems because they don't have the range. Ukraine simply don't have the Patriot systems that are capable of shooting Russian airplanes down at longer range. And for that reason, Ukrainian forces was pounded by glider bombs, and also helicopters was firing missiles at them that were killing them. So that's why we see that these kill ratios are dropping. Also, Russia has launched their own counteroffensives, which are very substantial. And quite frankly, when you launch an offensive, then we should expect the Russian casualties to go up, but they haven't gone up. We can see here, what are the daily losses for Russia? Well, for the entire war, for tanks, it was 9.2, and then it has gone up only to 10.6 in the last 10 months. That's not a big increase considering that Russia has escalated the war considerably. They should have had much higher losses, but they just don't, because Ukraine has been starved of ammunition. They could have killed twice that number if Ukraine had not been starved of ammunition. Then it would have been 20 tanks lost every day. Now it's 10.6. And it just bothers me that Europe and United States, we keep getting surprised about, they need ammunition. It's like we are completely idiots. We have forgotten how to make war. You need to be well supplied in order to do a war like the Second World War. And this is actually a war that is on the scale of the Second World War. Russia has already lost as many people actually as United States lost during 5 years of war during Second World War. So this is a serious war. And instead of reacting to things that are happening in Ukraine and then desperately bringing weapons to Ukraine in a hurry, why not be a little proactive and actually anticipate exactly what is happening and start doing that instead of just being surprised all the time by our own ignorance to help Ukraine? We are at war with Russia. This is, you could say, a third world war. It definitely is. We just haven't started fighting directly between NATO and Russia, but we might as well do it because Russia wants to expand. Putin has said that Russia has no borders. They will take whatever they can, and that's how Russia will always define themselves. If they are strong, they will expand and conquer other countries. If they can't, well, then they can't, but they will expand. So yeah, that is kind kind of third world war, and we need to teach Russia a lesson that they just can't do that. They have to keep behind their old internationally recognized borders. But no, here in Europe and United States, we still don't really understand how serious this is. Now, the final thing we should note about the data here in this table is that we can see that the months to depletion of the Russian stocks has dropped a little bit for tanks from 25 months to now 22 months because the loss rate here per day has increased, so that one will drop. And also we can see the same has happened for armored vehicles. The remaining stock has dropped from 30 months to now 26 months. But it was only a small drop. It could have been much higher had we supplied ammunition to Ukraine and also long-range anti-aircraft rockets so they could have kept Russian airplanes away from the front lines, killing all the Ukrainians, and also prevented Ukraine's economy from being destroyed by long-range Russian missiles that are plummeting all over Ukraine. Now let's consider the artillery systems, and we have the data down here in this row, and we can see that the kill ratio for Ukraine with regard to artillery systems has dropped from 2.6 to 2.5 in the last 10 months. But what's more interesting is that daily kills of these artillery systems has gone up from 14.7 to 25.4 every day, and that's quite remarkable. So why is the reason that this has happened? Well, one of the things that has increased the Russian losses of artillery is that Ukraine has gotten modern anti-artillery radar equipment that can pinpoint where the Russian artillery is shooting from as soon as they shoot, and then Ukraine can shoot back at those positions. And Ukraine has also gotten modern long-range artillery systems, among other countries from my country, who have sent them top modern French artillery systems that can be fired fast and that can then drive themselves away quickly after they have fired in order not to themselves become a target of Russian anti-artillery fire. So that's one thing. And then also Ukraine has gotten HIMARS, but not enough HIMARS, and they haven't gotten enough ammunition for these HIMARS systems. But of course, HIMARS is also a great weapon. When you can pinpoint where the Russian artillery is, you could send HIMARS rockets at those locations in order to knock the Russian artillery out. And also HIMARS is a fast-moving rocket. It's like 3,000 kilometers an hour, same speed as an artillery shell. Russia, on the other hand, they have failed to use their counter-battery radars effectively. They've complained a lot about that it doesn't work, and their radars and their gunners are not fast enough to fire back at Ukraine. But they have one weapon that has been enormously successful, and that in, I would say, the past year has been produced in much larger scale by Russia, and that's this weapon down here. It's a Lancet kamikaze drone that has the range to go up to 30-40 kilometers behind enemy lines and find the Ukrainian artillery systems and then destroy them. I have even read that for targeting it uses AI targeting system, which could be true because it's a pretty large weapon, and these AI chips for self-homing, they require about 100 watt to function. But the thing is, Russia don't produce these AI chips, nor do they produce the communication chips that this Lancet drone needs in order to function. They are imported from other countries, and I'm pretty sure it's NVIDIA chips that are used, and also other Western chips that are used for communication here, and somehow they end up in Russia even though they're under sanctions. Of course, sanctions will never be 100% effective, so there will be a number of chips that no matter what we do, Russia can get them and they'll end up in Russia. But one of the reasons we should escalate this war is that it will be easier for Ukraine to get many more weapons than it will be for Russia to increase production, because beyond a certain level, Russia simply cannot get the sanctioned components they need for making the advanced weapons that actually works. So that's one way to defeat Russia, that is to escalate the war, make it far more intense so that Russia cannot follow suit and produce more equipment for their military because they're under sanctions. Okay, there's one more thing I wanted to say about these data here, and that's about captured tanks that there's statistics for up here. You can see if we consider all of the war, then Russian has losses here, of which 534 tanks were captured, and Ukraine only had 131 that was captured. So here, Ukraine actually, in the beginning of the war, they got a lot of Russian equipment that they could use to attack the Russians with subsequently. But if we consider the last 10 months, then we can see the same thing here for tanks. It says minus 10 tanks, so it has gone down. How can that be? Why isn't it positive? It's because Ukraine hasn't captured any tanks, plus some of the observation that were previously considered captured have now been reclassified by this organization, what are they called, ORYX, that are collecting all these data for the kills, and they've simply reclassified them as being not captured anymore. That's how this one can become negative. And the same thing happened here for some of the Ukrainian tanks. There are 8 of those that are no longer considered captured. So the point is just that Ukraine had a really large source of military equipment that was the Russians themselves in the beginning of the war, but that has completely ended. Russia is now much more organized in their war. They are destroying destroying all equipment that has the potential to fall into Ukrainian hands, and that's one of the reasons why Ukraine hasn't captured any tanks anymore from Russia. Another reason is that Ukraine hasn't taken any territory back from Russia in the past 10 months. On the contrary, Ukraine has lost territory to Russia, and of course, normally if you capture enemy equipment, it's because you have taken some territory from the enemy, and then you capture some equipment that the enemy hasn't had time to evacuate or destroy. So I thought that was interesting. Also, the kill ratio for engineering vehicles, it's shown down here as number 9, engineering vehicle and special equipment. What is engineering equipment? Well, it can be this one. It's a truck that can lay out a bridge over a river. That's a typical piece of engineering equipment. Another engineering equipment can be a vehicle that can clear mines. And these vehicles, when you attack, they're always going first together with tanks in order to lay a bridge or clear a minefield. So they're very vulnerable. They are targeted when you attack. And that can perhaps explain why the kill ratio here for Ukraine has dropped from 3 for the total war. And then the last 10 months where Ukraine launched their summer offensive, they lost a lot of engineering equipment during that summer offensive that completely failed. And now it's only 1.7 here. It has dropped to that level now. Everything's not completely hopeless for Ukraine. We can see here, I have this statistic here that shows the population of Russia and Ukraine. You can see Russia is a much bigger country. I talked about it in the beginning. They also have a much bigger GDP as measured in billions of dollars. So you can see it's not enough for Ukraine to have some kill ratio of equipment and personnel that is below 4.1, which is the population advantage of Russia. It has to be higher than that for Ukraine to win the war. And also Ukraine's economy here is much, much smaller measured in terms of dollars than Russia's. But Ukraine can still win because Ukraine got United States and a European Union as their friends, and we have much bigger economies. The US has $25,000 billion and the EU has $20,000 billion. So we can easily match the weapon production that Russia has. Currently, Russia is spending $240 billion on the war every year. That's about 11% of their GDP, which is $2,200 billion. All we could do is we could give Ukraine $250 billion per year for this war, and also give them better modern weapons that are better than the weapons Russia has. Then Ukraine will win if they get better weapons than Russia and also more weapons. And even $250 billion is nothing compared to the enormous economies that are a fact of the United States and the European Union. So yeah, Ukraine can win if there's a will here in the United States and also Europe to give Ukraine what it takes to win. So let's talk about what Ukraine can do in order to win the war. How can they get their kill ratios up specifically for tanks, armored vehicles and also artillery? So next up, increasing Ukraine's kill ratios for tanks and armored vehicles in 2024 and beyond. How do we do it? The number one killer in 2024 here is already the small first-person viewer drones with strapped on a rocket-propelled grenade costing about $1,000 each. It's from $600 to $1,500. I have a picture of it here. Down here we have a grenade. It's about this big in diameter and about that long. It can either be a fragmentation bomb for killing infantry, or it can be an armor-piercing version that can kill tanks and armored vehicles. And it's less than 2 kilos. And you strap that under a small drone here, and then you put a big battery on top as well. And it can only fly for a few minutes, like 5 minutes typically, for 3 or 4 kilometers. That's all it got, and then it will crash after that because it's out of battery. But it's a very affordable weapon, as we can see here. The lowest cost, $600. That would be for a fragmentation bomb and also a smaller battery pack. And then the higher cost, that would be for an armor-piercing grenade that costs more and also a larger battery pack. But $1,000 for a weapon that can kill a tank that costs $10 million. That's an amazing weapon. And Ukraine are now making 3,000 of these weapons every single day. That's 1 million that they are making a year. And 1 million a year, that would cost a fortune, wouldn't it? No, it wouldn't, because it's $1,000 each. And if you just multiply 1 million with $1,000, well, that's only $1 billion. And I was just talking about that Russia spent $240 billion per year in this war, and we should support Ukraine also with about $250 billion. So $1 billion to create the number one killer on the battlefield. That's an amazingly low price for this weapon. There are some evidence for these weapons, and that is that only about 10% of the drones are actually hitting either infantry or vehicles. But that still means if you have 3,000 of them to send towards your enemy every day, that means you have 300 kills every day just from these kind of weapons. And just to repeat for comparison, we just got the statistics about how many kills there are here on the Russian forces. And for total equipment losses, it's 62. And then we have 774 daily personnel kills killed and 2,300 daily wounded Russians, plus 30 losses of non-armored vehicles like trucks and jeeps. That's the total number of kills, and 300 of those are from these FPV drones alone, that single weapon. That's quite a lot. That makes it the most important weapon in the war already. But the thing is, if Ukraine now, let's say they spent $10 billion on small drones, that's entirely possible, especially if they get aid from Europe and United States, then they can entirely do that, finance that every year. That would allow them to make 10 million of these drones, and then they can attack Russia with 30,000 of these drones per day. And even if we assume that the success rate is still 10%, we still get 3,000 successful kills every day. That will totally change the war, and that could win the war for Ukraine. It's just a matter about scaling this production. And I'd say it's not so difficult to scale a small weapon like this into larger numbers. It could be produced in basements and private homes all over Ukraine. They get some boxes with these electric engines and propellers, and then they assemble it. And then on the front line, the soldiers themselves, just before they've sent these drones off, they have a target and they know what to kill, how far away it is, which direction it is, because it has been pointed out to them by a spotter drone. And then they strap the appropriate grenade on, the appropriate battery on, and then they send it off. That's how it functions. Ukraine can do much more with this. And also Russia will of course try to also get to 10 million small FPV drones per year. But they can't do it, Russia. They can't scale to that amount because Russia do not produce the controller chip that controls the drone, and they don't produce a communication chip that enables radio communication to the drone, and also they don't produce the battery packs. All of that they have to import from other countries, and it's only China and the free world that are making these components, and they have to come from either us or China. And certainly we have sanctioned Russia and China. If they don't sell Russia these things, and they have to make a deliberate choice to sell Russia these things, you can't smuggle 10 million controller chips over the border without China's authorities noticing it or fully cooperating with this effort. And frankly, I don't think China has an interest in having Russia to win this war, because if they do, it will just make Russia stronger, and it will mean that China has a bigger military threat. For China, Russia is a military threat. They have nuclear weapons. Russians are deeply nationalist. They think they are the lords of the world, and certainly they would love to also rule over China if they could, but they can't. And I don't think China will do anything to expand the Russian empire. And that's why I think ultimately that China will not deliver the weapons for Russia to win this war over Ukraine. And also, what else can happen here? Well, we have this current success rate of 10% kills for these FPV drones. What if you could get it to 30%? Then, of course, it would be even worse. Then we wouldn't have 3,000 successful kills every day. Then it would be 9,000 successful kills per day. It will be a slaughter every day for the Russians. They would lose not 1,000 soldiers per day. They would lose 10,000 soldiers per day. Ukraine's kill ratios will not be 2.7. No, it would be 27 in Ukraine's advantage if they could produce 30,000 of these FPV drones and get the success rate up. And that's entirely possible again. You can have better battery packs that packs more energy, that can increase the range and time that these drones can fly, and also increase the weight of the warhead so it gets more deadly. You can have better communication chips and antennas that can be more resilient to electronic warfare. Just a simple thing. Because I'm making YouTube videos, I'm investigating a little bit about wireless microphones. I'm actually using a wireless right now for this microphone. But there are wireless systems that can change frequency and use many frequencies to transmit on. You can have communication chips that can simply, if they are jammed in one frequency that they're transmitting in, then they will automatically jump to another frequency that isn't being jammed. And if that is being jammed, then it just jumps again to another frequency. When I was in the army many years ago, I was actually in radio communication troops, and I did encryption and all that stuff. So I know a little bit about it, even though it was a long time ago and we had not as modern equipment that we do now. But you can do so many things for these kill ratios to be much better. What Ukraine is doing right now with FPV drones is amazing, but it's nothing compared to what's coming and how good these FPV drones will be going forward in terms of killing the enemy people and equipment. Also, control chips can be upgraded to use AI for target identification. So the drone can itself figure out what is a tree, what is an enemy soldier, what is a tank, and so forth. And it can also use AI for navigation. It can have maps programmed in, and it simply follow the landscape instead of using GPS that can be jammed. And also, it doesn't need to have radio communication with a controller because it can find its own targets by themselves. So all that stuff can make the success ratio of a kill for these drones go up. There's only one thing, and that is that if you have to use this more advanced AI stuff, then you need a computer chip that will require up to 100 watts to run, because you require pretty powerful computers to run good AI inference that can do all this. And that means only the bigger drones will be able to use them. And these drones I'm showing you here in this picture are probably too small. They don't deliver 100 watt. They deliver more than 100 watt for these engines, but if they also have to deliver 100 watt for the controller chip, that's a little bit too much. But there are bigger drones that will be able to deliver the needed power for an AI chip that can do all the work, so you don't even have to have human operators. You just send them in over enemy territory, and then they'll find the enemy all by themselves and kill them. But let's move on. Now, the previous slide discussed how Ukraine can increase their killings of Russian equipment, but there's another side to increasing a kill ratio, and that is to being better at defending yourself against getting killed by your enemy. What can we say here? The number one reason that Ukraine suffers losses among tanks and armored vehicles, that is that Ukraine lacks sufficient anti-aircraft and also electronic warfare capability to defend effectively against these small FPV drones that we have a picture up here, but also Russia using helicopters with long-range anti-tank missiles that they can fire up to 10 kilometers behind enemy lines and hit Ukrainian tanks and armored vehicles with. So what are the solution to this problem that Ukraine have? Then again, it's quite obvious. Ukraine needs more electronic warfare systems like this. Down here we have a picture of such an electronic warfare system. That's pretty much how they look. And also they need anti-aircraft guns like this Gepard system from Germany, which is a very old system, but we had that kind of guns all the way back to Second World War, and we need these guns to be back on the battlefield because they are the only thing that can shoot down these FPV drones effectively. The munition for these guns is not that expensive, so you can't use this down here, a Patriot system, to shoot down small FPV drones. That would be ridiculous. This one costs $1,000. One of these rockets from a Patriot system can cost upwards of $3 million a piece. So you need some cheap ammunition to knock this FPV drone threat out of the sky, and that would be these old-fashioned anti-aircraft guns. And of course, electronic warfare equipment that can jam the signal, both the navigation and the communication signal to these drones. But another thing that Ukraine needs to combat the Russian helicopters is, of course, modern aircraft and also these Patriot long-range anti-aircraft missile systems. They could be used to hunt down and shoot down these Russian helicopters so they cannot get close enough to make their kills on Ukrainian tanks and armored vehicles. And of course, it would be best if we would send Ukraine F-35 fighter jets. That's the most modern fighter jet that the United States have and that NATO have. They are radar invisible, so they will only be discovered by Russia in the very last minute when they are very close to their radar system. Then they are discovered. They're not completely invisible. I don't know where the cutting point is, but I could imagine if they're more than 30 kilometers away from a Russian radar, then they can't see them. They have to be closer. Going forward, future wars, I don't think the tank, the main battle tank, has a future because it cannot defend against these FPV drones that will be enormously effective in the future because they'll get AI chips so they can find their own targets and you can't jam them. It's only one thing that can shoot them down. That's an old-fashioned anti-aircraft gun. And that means that all armored vehicles, in my opinion, in the future will get an anti-aircraft gun on top because otherwise they'll die. They'll have to have a weapon against these FPV drones that will be everywhere in modern warfare by the thousands. And also armored vehicles, they will have to have built-in electronic warfare systems as well. So these two things will have to be part of any armored vehicle. Otherwise, it won't survive for very long on the battlefield. But let's move on. So what about artillery? How can Ukraine get better at killing Russian artillery? Well, they can scale up what already is proven to work. That would mean that Europe and United States have to supply more counter-battery radars and surveillance drones and fully automated artillery. How does that work? It means you have a surveillance drone like this one shown in this picture here, and that drone will find the Russian artillery, and then you start firing on that artillery. An alternative way to find Russian artillery is these counter-battery radars that can discover from where Russian artillery is shooting from. And then, of course, you need artillery that is fully automated and that is self-propelled like this. I think this is a Swedish Archer artillery system, the only fully automated heavy-duty artillery gun in the world. You don't need anybody to feed the gun. It's fully automated. It can do it all by itself mechanically, and therefore it can fire faster. So the idea is to be effective about this is that you fire a couple of shells and then you pack up and drive away immediately before the Russians are able to shoot back at you. So that's how Ukraine should do. They should do more of what they already do that is quite successful, but they should also copy Russia's success with this Lancet drone. I have a picture of down here. Ukraine need to develop their own Lancet drone that uses AI chips to navigate and also to locate and find Russian targets and then kill them. But the other side to getting better kill ratios for artillery is, of course, to being better at defending against getting killed by the Russians. And how can Ukraine do that? Well, they could deploy old-fashioned anti-aircraft guns together with their artillery system so that if a Lancet drone is discovered and starting to attack their artillery units, then they have anti-aircraft guns that can shoot them down before they successfully hit the Ukrainian artillery, and also electronic warfare again that can jam the signal to these Lancet drones. And then, of course, Ukraine should not have these old-fashioned artillery systems that are loaded manually and that are not self-propelled. They take too long to move out of harm's way. So the more you can have of these fully automated systems that are self-propelled, the less your losses will be among your own artillery. And then, of course, you should also have radars that monitor the sky for Lancet drones. And when you discover that there's a Lancet drone, then you send a fast aircraft out to shoot it down with a machine gun. So that's another way to fight this. But okay, that was a very long presentation, and now I'm done. The only thing I have to say is I wish you a great life in freedom and democracy, and thank you for watching my video. Goodbye.